Welcome to the old school. This is Steve, and I'm waiting for Ross to get back from Europe. Apparently, he's somewhere in Germany. He calls once in a while. We have a Zoom occasionally, and he sends me all these text messages of the food he's eating. So that's his idea of proof, is showing food. And quite frankly, the food looks pretty damn good. We're going to be showing some, or playing, not showing, some clips from Ross and his thoughts traveling, particularly in Germany. I think there are 5 or 6 short clips, and then it'll be followed by an episode of the old school, the good old school with Ross and Steve. So enjoy Ross's commentary, and then we'll close out with a proper old school at the end, and we'll see how it fits together. Thank you.
And greetings, everybody. So one of the things I talked about, both in relation to Germany, but then also Italy, was the notion of driving. And driving in both countries hold their own equal fascination and joy and interest, especially if you love driving as I do. But one of the things that Germany in particular, but all the countries in Europe do very well, is mass transit in the form of trains. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced a train before in Europe. There are various things that make it interesting, that make it noteworthy. One, I'll give you a little secret. I love people watching, and you can do some serious people watching on a train. Now, you also have to kind of play it cool. You can't do like a kind of a death stare at somebody, but at the same time, it's fun to just kind of watch folks. Because, I don't know, it's just fun to do it. It's fun to guess what their life is like. It's fun to guess what they might do for a living. I know this is all pure speculation, but hey, there's a tactic here that you can use, and it just makes the trip go by a little bit easier. But I think one of the other things I like a lot about train travel is simply looking out the window. I love being next to the window. I love kind of just watching the landscape change if I'm doing like a long trip, or just noticing the different towns that we pass through, either very quickly or we stop off at each place. What the Germans call a Bumblebahn, which is kind of like a train that stops at every single tiny little place. But I get the joy of doing that, and I find it relaxing. I find that the seats that they have on trains are more for the size of human adults in comparison to, say, planes. Because the seats are a little bit nicer or a little bit roomier, it makes for a much more comfortable experience just on a whole. Now, AC, a lot of them do have AC, but that's not always a given. And you have to then start kind of going around, opening up the windows. You know, they usually have the windows that open up like at the top, kind of like the old school buses did, where you had to kind of press the two things together and bring it down a little bit. They have something to that effect. And that's nice too, getting some air in, not so great when you're going through a tunnel and you're basically getting exhaust or it smells like it. But otherwise, it's pretty nice. But I like the fact that it's not super fast. I mean, there are the bullet trains, of course, and I have been on one bullet train. That's the one in Japan. But I like the notion of just being able to go slow enough, although not slow, but going slow enough that you can kind of observe things. Herr Dr. Bourgeois has a story about looking out of a train while kind of just surveying the historical kind of landscape around him. And one of his students came up to him asking if there was something wrong. Now, this part of what we ended up doing was making sure that became like a question that we included in our application process, because we wanted kids to think about what it meant to kind of ride a train and what kind of benefits that you can get from riding a train. So part of that kind of goes into it, and it's part of one of the reasons why I like it so much. Have not done as much train travel in the United States. I don't know how often you guys have just jumped on an Amtrak and made your way across the country. It's not something that's done. Interestingly, though, Texas has begun a project to create a bullet train in the state of Texas. And they have started work to create the first leg of it, which will go from Dallas-Fort Worth down to Houston, which I'm pretty excited about. And all these things are going to be, I think eventually what they're planning on doing is going from Houston to El Paso and then El Paso back to Dallas. I don't know how many people are going to El Paso, but if any state needs a bullet train, it's probably Texas. And they'll probably do a much better job than what California has been struggling with over the last several years, doing just a small little leg of between Los Angeles and some other place. So who knows? Maybe California will get it together. It hasn't happened yet, but hope springs eternal. Until then, we have the Texas bullet train to look forward to. Maybe there's a chance that we can start a trend in the U.S. because train travel is a lot of fun. See ya. Well, here we are back in Germany for one of what might be one of my last little vignettes from the old world. But right now, one of the things I wanted to kind of consider was some of the kind of other characteristics of Germany that tends to be quite different from the United States, assuming that's where most other people who are listening to this podcast originate. And it's not necessarily good or bad or otherwise, although, some do, some are, but they kind of represent just some of the differences that people tend to have to kind of deal with and adjust to when they come to Germany. Now, some of the things are going to be mentioned in the kind of the longer segment that's here Dr. Bourgeois and I have that's going to be associated with this little snippet. However, to kind of go a little bit more into detail. And I think the first thing, one of the things that, and this is not just in Germany, this is throughout large parts of Europe, and that is the idea of the presence of fizzy water. That's difficult to kind of overcome. I never am completely convinced that you get hydrated with fizzy water, but that's all they drink. And I sit there and I sometimes wonder how come all these people aren't dehydrated. They might be, but nevertheless, it's one of those things that you constantly have to think about. When you order, you got to make sure that you ask for it. And now I will say that most of the waiters and waitresses know that you're an Americano and they know that you probably don't like the fizzy water. But nevertheless, you ask for it. And then also with that, of course, is the notion of the ice, because typically, the Europeans and the situations that I have been confronted with does not require ice, and oftentimes they don't have it. And I've had friends with me from the United States order ice, and they say, "Oh yeah, no, we don't have ice." And so sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It depends on how touristy of an area that you happen to be in. That's kind of like one aspect of it. I think another thing that you're confronted with often when you come to Germany, in particular, Europe in general, has to do with tipping. With tipping, I grew up with the notion that if you did not have enough money to tip, you didn't have enough money to go out to eat. And the notion was that you were to tip. What's gone up, hasn't it? It seems like when I was younger, the accepted level of tipping was like 10 to 15%. And now, you get those things that go up to like 25%. And I'm like, holy cow. No matter how great a waiter or waitress is, that's a lot of cash. And so here in Germany, of course, this has always been kind of like a point that people, Europhiles in the United States will say, well, they get paid a respectable wage. And that's true. They do get paid a respectable wage. It would be interesting to compare what a respectable wage in Germany in a respectable restaurant is compared to that same when you include tips in the United States. I think sometimes, that's been part of the big debate in the United States about the notion of tipping. Some restaurants trying to do without it, and some waiters and waitresses not necessarily liking the notion. Some places definitely, because they don't get paid a lot, and tips are the main way that they get their money. But here in Germany, basically rounding up accounts for a tip. So if they gave you a tip of 30, if they gave you a bill of 38 euros and 50, then if you just say 39 or you get crazy and say 40 when you hand them the money, then that can amount to a tip. Now I think some Germans probably like Americans coming in because Americans tip almost subconsciously, or maybe unconsciously, but that's kind of like an aspect of the culture around here. And it is kind of interesting when you do try to tip even a little bit. In some places, they just kind of, just kind of tisk a little bit and say, listen, yeah, we don't do that here. But most places will kind of take a nominal tip, and that's what you do here. Outside of that, there's so many little things that you're confronted with. The fact that the Germans love all of their doors in their house closed, it creates kind of like a barrier, and it creates a level of uncertainty. And I always have to talk to students that I bring to Germany and tell them this, is that, listen, when you're confronted with a closed door, it doesn't necessarily mean what it might mean in the United States. In the United States, it might mean one of two things. One, someone is busy on the other side of that door, like a bathroom, and you're not to go in. Or two, someone is requiring privacy, either for themselves or for a conversation. And again, you're not to enter into that door. And so when Americans first come over here, and especially if they stay with a family and the doors are all closed, it can be it can create a certain level of uncertainty when confronted with that. What do I do? Do I open it? Do I knock? Do you knock on a door inside of a house? That tends to be one of the things that many of my friends and then students that I've had over here have talked about. I think water usage is a big deal here. In the United States, I don't think most people think about the water that they use in their house. They don't think about how much water they use in their house. And I must admit, I did not either until I got involved in these various student exchanges. And it was through that experience that I realized that the Germans have a very different concept about the usage of water in the house. One, not least of which because water is expensive. As a utility, water is extremely expensive here in Germany. And so therefore, the Germans are very judicious about when and how much they use. So, for example, you sit there washing your hands or you're brushing your teeth. Most Americans would simply leave the water on throughout that entire process. That is not the way it rolls in Germany, where they would wet down, lather up, turn the water off, clean your hands, then turn the water back on, rinse them off, turn the water off, dry your hands, and then go about your business. Same thing with showers. One of the things that I'm often confronted with when trying to explain to American students about, going to Germany and here's some things that you need to do, they are most shocked about the notion of how they should probably take a shower. And I tell them that you take Navy showers, wet down, soap up, rinse off, get out, and shut water off in between all those stages. And for them, it's just a game changer as far as how they go about it. And they probably hate every second of it and will go back to the United States and just let that baby run. But for some folks and for some students and some friends of mine, I have noticed, or they have told me about the fact that they are changing heretofore all water habits back in the United States. So I think some of the things that you get when you come to another country, Rick Steves often said that the biggest thing that you can get visiting another country is a different perspective. And I think for a lot of Americans and a lot of my students, that's definitely what they end up getting is a different perspective, a different way of doing things, a different way of thinking about things. Now, the Germans are just as capable of being wrong and not very practical as others. Please see earlier conversation about air conditioning. Still, it is kind of fascinating to have these experiences and to try to kind of see how you might incorporate them in your life if you choose to go that way. All right, so that's enough for right now. That's way too long. That's much longer than my usual spiels. I can imagine one more, perhaps, before it's all said and done, maybe two more, and then that will be it from Europe. Until then, shall say adieu. So good morning, everybody. This is your friendly neighborhood former U.S. history teacher. I am sitting in the tranquil environments of a garden in a small town in Germany. Early morning. No one is up yet because it's Sunday. Why would you? But I am to bring you the latest and greatest from Germany. As it relates to this particular thing, there's a big controversy that's been brewing for some time in Germany, and it has to do with speed limits on the Autobahn. Now, for those of you who think that the entirety and the whole of the Autobahn is sans speed limits, you would be incorrect. It never was that way. I think that's just some rumors that got started by perhaps elementary school boys who just love the need for speed. But indeed, there are speed limits to be found in Germany on the Autobahn. And of course, you're also restricted by the fact that, like everywhere else, there are traffic jams and backups on the Autobahn. And so it's not just this pale male kind of exhilaration driving on the Autobahn. There are parts of it, true, but not the whole thing. And it has a lot to do as far as the reaction to greater amount of proposed speed limits. Because for the Germans, they equate this to a sense of freedom, a sense of exhilaration, the likes of which very few other people get to experience. And the notion of should there be speed limits. Now, in the United States, of course, we've had a rather dubious history with speed limits. We went fairly silly there for a while in the 1970s. Some of the older members of our listening audience may have recalled the Drive 55 campaign under President Carter that was designed to react and to respond to the energy crisis that was going on at the time, where gasoline was skyrocketing as far as the prices doubling in many cases throughout the 70s. And so, and we were also driving cars the size of city blocks, and we needed to do something. And so the 55 mile an hour speed limit, figured out by some scientists as being the optimal speed limit to conserve gasoline. And then somewhere in the 90s, that changed. Not in Maryland, of course. We hung on to the 55 mile an hour speed limit for quite some time. But then by the mid-90s, everyone's on board. 65 was the speed limit, but everyone went 75. And then by the 2010s, I think it was pretty commonplace to find speed limits at around 70, 75, depending upon what part of the country you were in. You could go into parts of West Texas where you're not going to find much of anything, no town, no store, no occasional pedestrian crossing the street, and you will find no speed limit, effectively no speed limit. But we tried to maintain some sense of constraint, and so therefore we do have some kind of a speed limit. Here in Germany, of course, that has not always been the case, and it's thought that it was the individual's responsibility as to how fast you would go. Now, in addition to the speed limit, there is other considerations that are religiously practiced here in Germany with regards to driving, things that used to be commonplace and accepted in the United States, but recent car trips have convinced me that no longer is the case. For example, in Germany, you are not allowed to pass on the right, because that means you're going into slower lanes and you're driving like a bat out of hell to get around people. You can't do that. The passing lane, not the fast lane, which some people erroneously label it in the United States, the passing lane is for the left only. And here's something else that I've kind of noticed. There is no hurt feelings on the part of your typical German driver. And if you recall my episode on Italian drivers, there does not seem to be any kind of hurt feelings when someone wants to go faster than you. We do seem to have an inordinate amount of former hall monitors who are just naturally appalled at people who want to get past them, people who, God forbid, flash their lights at them to get them to go move over. We have so many people, it seems, in the United States that take it as a personal affront that they would be asked to move over. In Germany, however, that's just considered commonplace. Part, of course, and so someone comes up on you, and they're going faster than you. You get out of the way. You are the problem, not necessarily them. And so, because there is a strong expectation about these rules of the road, slower traffic stays to the right, passing traffic stays to the left, and then once you pass, you come back over. Because it's so religiously adhered to in many cases, there is it's a greater level of tolerance for a greater amount of speed, and it's also safer. You do not see the amount of car pileups in Germany that you see in the United States. Of course, they have accidents here. They have many accidents here, but it's not to the degree that you might associate with this rather, you know, out of control in some people's mind, speed limit issue. They don't have it. And so therefore, the ability to be able to maintain it is of some concern to some Germans. And that's why the speed limit issue is such a controversial thing. For me, I follow, as my cultural and political heritage would suggest, every time the government passes a law that leaves a little less freedom for the rest of us, as said by a very well-known character on West Wing, and I agree with that. I think I think that is the case, and I think for the Germans that is also the case. Now, the Germans have given up a certain amount of freedom in other areas, but with the rules of the road, they remain resolute, or at least most of them do. So there you go. A couple of observations about driving in Germany, and some of the controversies surrounding how speed limits should be done. Not meant to be an exhaustive treatment of the subject, and I'm sure there are many other things that could be said. Maybe we'll talk about it later in a later episode. But as for now, Sunday morning, 7:30 in the morning, here in small town Germany, I bid you adieu. So greetings, everybody, live from Germany. Not when you hear this, of course. I won't be live any longer. I will be alive, but not live. Anyway, I am sitting here getting ready to go to bed, as the rest of you who listen to this in the United States are going about your workday. And I'm confronted with something that I have had to deal with every time I come to Germany, and that is the lack of air conditioning. Now, when the Germans come to the United States, as the students have as part of the exchange that myself and my colleague, here, Dr. Bourgeois, have taken part in for quite some time, they like the AC, but they think we use it too much, and they're probably right. There's no reason why a Lululemon should feel like a meat locker. But that notwithstanding, they do appreciate a good AC. But for whatever reason, the appreciation for the AC doesn't really translate into actually getting AC in their own houses. You go to some countries and it's not like they have like window units, but they'll have like those little things up in the corner of the room that cools down just the room, like the bedroom. You see that in a lot of places, but you don't see it in Germany. Now, part of the reason is because Germany is not necessarily known as being a hot country, although it's getting a little bit toastier of late, but they don't have it. And so therefore, they've never felt the need to use it. Now, that's puzzling in and of itself, because the technology exists to cool these houses down. But the thing that's even more perplexing is not only will you not find AC, but you won't find fans. Now, to be honest, I haven't been to the local Walmart here in Germany of late, and so I don't know if fans actually exist here. It's possible they do, and so therefore any observation I make on the assumption that they don't exist might be a false one. But they just don't use it, and you don't see it. And so therefore they just tough it out, because they're tough people over here, and they just tough it out. I'm wondering when it will change. Like I said, I get it that it's not typically traditionally a place where it gets so hot that you might need it. But listen, even if it's 76, that's too hot to sleep in. I go with the American Medical Association. I think they're the ones that said this, that 68 was the optimal temperature to sleep in. And if you're thinking that 68 is ridiculously low, then my friend, Germany is for you. If you don't think it's too low, or if you don't think it's too low, then you might be about where I am. And really all of my students that I'm with at present are, because they're struggling. It's a tough one. It's a tough thing to deal with. Now, when I was in Italy, again, they had the little room units, but that's just because we stayed at fancy Airbnb places. I don't know if the regular apartment in Rome is going to have room units, but the places we stayed did, and it's because they probably paid a gazillion dollars for it. Still, it is something that Europe has got to get worked out. Now, if they're worried about the effect on the environment, let me tell you something. There are things killing the environment a lot quicker than AC units. So don't you worry your pretty little heads about that. This is what we need. We need the AC units in the room. And then you just, you can be judicious with them. You can be selective about when you have them. But as of right now, they don't have it. That said, don't let that keep you from coming to Germany, because it's a great country. The people are amazing, as are my host. And it definitely is a place that needs to be visited. But they've got to fix this AC issue. It's a travesty. All right, I'm out. Well, I'm back. It's been a bit of a break, but I am now in the tranquil settings of small town Germany. This is me alone. The family is flying back today while I embark on the very last of my student exchanges here in Germany. And my last observation as it relates to Italy has more, not so much to do with Italy, but it has more to do with tourists in general. Now, I do not hold myself up to be the vanguard of the perfect tourist. I'm sure I screw up all the time, to the embarrassment of more well-knowing American travelers. However, I do make a concerted effort to try to make sure that I am not imposing myself on other people, that I am not disrespecting my environs, things of that nature. And in that vein, I have a few observations to make. Now, I don't think anyone necessarily that I'm about to lambast, I don't think anyone necessarily is trying to be obnoxious. Maybe they are, I don't know. But clearly, there are some folks who don't have a sense of their surroundings, who do not have an awareness of what's going on. And you see it a lot. You had people, we were at the Trevi Fountain a couple of days ago, and a couple of the tourists tried to get into the fountain, much to the dismay and perhaps anger of the cops that were there. And I had read an article before leaving that this was becoming increasingly a problem, where visitors were just doing stupid stuff like, I don't know, jumping into a fountain. And because of that, actually, they're chucking them into jail. Now, as it happens, the folks that I saw, I guess, had not gotten that far, or were not being that outlandish where they deserved jail time, but they were being reprimanded by the police. And it's just the notion of you sitting there thinking to yourself, what would be a good idea if I jumped into this fountain? I mean, you wouldn't do that in the United States. I'm assuming these folks are Americans. They probably were not. Who knows? They probably were. Because let me tell you something. Americans can be a bit embarrassing overseas, but they're just jumping in. I don't know what their thought process is, but you just can't do stuff like that. And of course, it angers the Italians, and it angers anybody. It would anger anyone. It would anger the Japanese. It would anger all sorts of folks. You just did stupid stuff like that. I think one of the most outlandish, though, and the one that's so easy to criticize because it's so ridiculous, and perhaps this is low-hanging fruit, but I can't help it. And that is the influencers, that is the Instagrammers, the TikTokers, or whatever they call themselves. You're standing in a place. We went into the Vatican, and we went into St. Peter's Basilica. And by any stretch of the definition, St. Peter's Basilica is considered a kind of a holy place. But you go in there and you see that, and you see all the things that you're surrounded by. You see the statues, the paintings, the artwork, the machinations of doing a mass. And then you see some Instagrammer taking pictures of themselves as if they are actually the real reason for being in that particular spot. And so to ignore everything else that's going on around it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But there you have it. And it's so easy to make fun of these people. They look ridiculous. They're acting ridiculous. They're posing ridiculous. And it's just this level of narcissism that beggars the imagination. The fact that you could be in a place like St. Peter's Basilica and take a picture with the idea that you are the most important part of this thing is the height of obnoxiousness. And this is one of the reasons why tourists get a bad name. And I'm betting they were probably Americans, but I could be wrong. Could be Russians. There were Russians around there. So anyway, so a couple of observations about just the general notion of how tourism is, and sometimes the ridiculousness that tourists go to try to put themselves into the situation. We'll see how it comes out. Germany tend to be a little bit more laid back. Who knows? We'll see. But anyway, observations from the road now in Germany. Later. And good morning, I think. Welcome to the old school. Is it morning? Herr Dr. Bourgeois?
Herr Miller, it's late morning here in Texas, and it's probably almost dinner time where you are.
It is almost dinner time where I am. And nevertheless, here I am, live from Germany and enjoying life, although not that I'm only going to enjoy life for one more week, but I have a mere 1 week left before I get to go back to the nurturing environs of North Texas, the nurturing bosom of home and hearth. And yeah, so I'm pretty excited. We've been very busy on this exchange. The kids are exhausted. They're not used to moving this much. And the Germans are kind of giggling at them, I guess. This is the weekend, so they are hopefully enjoying some quality family time. And the next week we wrap up, or this week coming up, we're going to wrap up the exchange. And me and a handful of kiddos, there's actually quite a few, more so than I can remember, that are doing special flight considerations. So I think I'm only flying back with like 10 people.
This is really strange. First of all, it's strange because you have an extreme close-up on your Zoom right now, and so I feel like it's a little bit awkward. You should put the camera someplace else, like on the wall or something. That's better. It was distracting.
That's basically the ceiling.
Yeah, that's okay. It's an improvement. Yeah,
Okay.
I see your hand there. So you're actually in a room and locked away in Germany they do close doors there too.
They do. So it's nothing strange, the fact that people would go past my bedroom and find the door closed because all the other doors are closed. Why wouldn't this one? And so I think right now there's some machinations taking place for dinner, some type of soiree this evening. And yeah, and I tell you what, I mean, so one of the things that I'm kind of struck by, and I wanted to get your reaction to this as well, because you know this region that I'm in much more so than I do. But have you ever kind of got the sense that you were in a place that you would never be in if this place was like in the United States?
I don't understand the question. What aspect are you
Well,
getting?
so let me give you an example. So last night I'm in the town of Ingelheim in Germany, right along the Rhine River, right across from an area of Germany colloquially known as the Rheingau. And I found myself last night at what's called a museum festival. And there was a very kind of exalted and famous artist who had an exhibition at the museum. And outside the museum was this rather extensive wine festival. And there's a lot of people that are dressed like you might think someone would be dressed going to a wine festival, with their sweaters tied, the arms of their sweaters tied in a knot around their neck, wearing fedoras. That's kind of a new thing, but it kind of fits. Just a lot of a type of vibe that I have never experienced in the United States. And I'm wondering to what extent you associate that vibe with this region. And maybe it's just the region, but I'm just not accustomed to this in my day-to-day existence.
Well, it sounds like you have people around you who are having fun, first of all, which we don't do much over here.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, the fedoras. I mean, drinking wine, it's a little different. I mean, I guess the vibe that comes out of what you described is that culture is actually cool,
Yes.
and being smart and intellectual, having actual conversations over wine is something that we don't see around here, and actually having any conversations of substance, you just don't get that. And yeah, with I mean, you have a few close friends that you have conversations, but it feels like they're more comfortable in their own skin, more comfortable being smart and talking about um, all kinds of topics, and maybe not going immediately to politics in these conversations. So I think you're in rarefied air, and that ship may have sailed here. It sounds like in the United States.
Well, I will say that this is my last exchange as an official member or doing or having any kind of official status. And so I am aware of that. I think, though, the thing I'll miss the most is basically what you just alluded to. And that was the idea that people are a lot more comfortable around here having conversations. And they're a lot more comfortable around here listening to and talking out different opinions, different ideas, different perspectives. In the United States, we have a crowd on the left that really can't handle other ideas. And we have a crowd on the right who also cannot really handle other ideas. They're really the same people. They just find themselves on different sides of the political spectrum. But here, there's the divide is not quite so severe. I mean, they've got serious issues here. They've got serious political discussions that they're having, not least of which is the rise of a kind of a populism, the likes of which we've seen in France, we've seen in Italy, we've seen in the United States. And so it's not that they are bereft of many of the same political issues that we struggle with. They just seem to struggle with it with a lot more dignity sometimes than we do.
That's interesting. So there's a level of comfort talking to people who have opposing views, and often, like about 95% of the time, they don't even talk about those views. They just socialize with these individuals because life is complicated and people have complicated stories and they're actually interested. And they find a way to have political opinion, but it doesn't dominate everything, and they don't judge people based upon that. They judge people like everyone does on a lot of other things, but that's pretty low in the ranking, I would say.
I think what you see is, yes, that is, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think in the United States, I think so many people, too many people, not everybody, but too many people view everything through a political prism, be it what they see on the news, be it who they hang out with, be it how they approach strangers. I think too many people look at it through a political prism. And while the political prism exists here, as you say, it is not anywhere near the top of things. It is more about, are you interesting? Do you have something to say? Do you have experiences? Can you answer questions? Can you talk about subjects? There's that old commercial about the woman who folds like a cheap lawn chair as soon as she gets a tough question. That person could not exist here just because here there's an expectation that you have something to say, that you're able to explain it, that you're able to, kind of compare and contrast it with other things. And it is an incredible aspect of being here.
I also think that we get off a little bit easy in our conversations. I mean, I think, you know, particularly with social media, you just click on the thumb up or whatever. But in German, if you do give an opinion, they will look you in the eye and say, well, tell me why you think that. And then they will sit and listen and stare at you. And we don't get called on things like that. And so we're not used to articulating. I think that, we would, you know, be unnerved by that type of a direct question, but you get it there, and it holds people to a standard.
Yeah, it's based upon a premise of be curious, not judgmental. Ask the questions. Seek to understand first before you sit there and you start to make your mind up. And I think if everybody could live on that ideal, hell, I mean, you just imagine how different our country would be if there wasn't such a rush to put forth an opinion, irregardless of any information that might make that opinion valid or interesting. They're just people throwing out crap, just, throwing spaghetti up against the wall and see what will stick, what will give them the most likes, and like you said. So I think that's the part of me that it's the part of Germany that I'm going to miss the most. But it also, I'm also kind of like in a certain strata of German society, and I don't get much variation. So it's kind of hard to know, from the people that you talk with, everything else that's being said and everything else that's being thought. But I just love this kind of political atmosphere, or not political, but this kind of conversational atmosphere. It is not unlike, being in France. I think France too has that kind of atmosphere. But
Well,
yeah.
the problem with France is that the French have a different word for everything, and so they could be saying all kinds of smart things, but but the Germans also will not only question you, but they'll correct you, and it's not to make you feel bad, but it's like to help you. It's a service, and so if you have a flaw of logic or something, they of course they will correct you on that, and um, but the from I mean we've both been all around Germany, and I don't think it's what you're talking about is unique to the Rhine Valley at all.
No.
Yeah, I mean the people we know people in the east and all areas. It's the same thing. It seems like a place for grown-ups, and the kids, the high school kids seem to have views and can speak intelligently. They are readers. Actually, they are readers, and so all
Mhm.
that comes out in a social setting. They do have weird television programs. I mean, it's so funny that they're so intellectual and they like these silly kind of trifles of weird talk shows and strangeness. But I mean, that's it feels like a little bit 1970s here, kind of that whimsy. But maybe that's a break for them from the thinking.
Well, I think one of the things also is that they are surrounded by serious things.
Hmm.
Germany right now, my host was asking me, how much do you see on the news nowadays about the Ukrainian war?
Hmm.
And I think to a certain extent, some Americans have kind of tuned out. I think a lot of people still are interested, but here in Germany, they're extremely interested because it's right next door. And if something should happen to the Ukraine, Germany is the next, major power. Not that the Ukraine's a major power, but Germany is probably going to be the next major country
Hmm.
that Russia would have to interact with.
Hmm.
And so I think for Germans, I think the to use an overused example of modern parlance, I mean, the struggle is real here in Germany,
Hmm.
and so therefore they really can't afford to be frivolous. I mean, they were on the cutting edge,
Hmm.
sometimes the bleeding edge of the Cold War. And I think that has created, not that they weren't like this before, but it's kind of fostered this kind of seriousness, this kind of willingness to discuss ideas, difficult ideas. And I should make this clear. I think that there's a lot about the United States and Americans that can be correlated with what's happening or what happens in Germany. I think Americans are typically very curious. I think that they're very willing to discuss things. Um, I think that they find value in learning about other places and other people. I just think that there's a lot of things that are also in place here that stops the conversation, that prevents the conversation, that has created an either or mindset that says these are my ideas. I cannot accept a challenge to any one aspect of it, or the whole entire thing crumbles. And because of that, that kind of creates some of the problems that we were discussing earlier. But I think we have at our root, we have some of these same shared notions. It's just that the Germans were able to kind of follow through, and where we once did, we certainly have not in, say, the last couple of decades.
Well, the seriousness, I think that's a good term for this. I mean, I have some news apps on my cell phone. I know you have like 9 apps, so you don't have room for one. But there are ways to get German news, not only in writing but also video and audio, and their top stories every day are the Ukraine every day. And
Every day, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's the maybe the top 4 or 5 stories, and as it should be. And so we're distracted with I mean, we have our news cycles, but with these news cycles we forget the actual news, I think.
Uh, well, I think it's one of those things where you try your best to try to kind of hang with them, and be open to the questions, be open to the challenges that they might have for your opinions, for your ideas. And if you can embrace that, and I'm just not talking about political, as you say, they're much more interested, and they're interested in many more things besides politics. I think as long as you're willing to open yourself up to that, it's one of the greatest experiences about being here in Germany. And it's one of the greatest experiences about having a mind that can think for itself. And you sit there and you have these conversations with people who have the same kind of abilities. And I'm going to miss this place. I must tell you, I do think I will come back to Germany. You
Famous
know,
famous words from Ross Miller, right?
MacArthur said, I will be back,
That's
and
right.
so will I. So,
Well, you're not like barred from the country because you're not traveling with a row of 20 high school kids. They'll still let you in.
yeah, but the row of 20 high school kids does make it easier because they pay for the trip. But no, you're right. I'm not barred from the country. It's just, I'm also kind of confronted with the idea that there are many other places I'd like to visit as well. So, those loom large in my imagination. And so while I do hope to come back to Germany soon, there are many other places that I hope to experience as well.
So some of the things that we're talking about are just European or maybe just non-American. But they're, my impression, throughout Europe, the Europeans I've met is that they know how to enjoy themselves, and they know how to take time enjoying themselves. And the idea of turning a table at a restaurant in 60 minutes in the United States. And I've played piano in a lot of restaurants, and the elite top tier restaurants will have a 90-minute limit, and it's implied, but it's actually what the waiters are trained to do. But we cycle through in just over an hour typically. And in Europe, if you go to a restaurant, you're there for the duration. You're literally shutting the place down. You're gonna have some wine before, during, and after, and you're gonna talk. And we don't have that. In fact, you almost feel this pressure when our waiter puts down the check and then comes back and say, "Everything okay? Hint, hint, get the hell out of here." And so
Yeah, but they always lay down the check and say, no rush,
yeah,
but there's a rush.
yeah, and that to me is the example of our culture, in a way. In
Now,
Europe, you take time for things like that, and it's a conversational culture because people don't just sit there and stare at each other; they're talking.
right. I mean, but I should say they don't have it all figured out here. I
What?
did a little clip that's going to be placed and adjoined with this little conversation that we're having now
Oh,
about the Germans' seeming aversion to air conditioning. So
I listened to that right before we got here. It sounds like you're complaining secretly about your. I mean, right now you're in a place, I've been there, and you're on the second floor, right?
on a second floor, yes.
Okay. And there's an air conditioning unit and two fans going right now.
No, there's nothing. You know that. You've been in the same.
Have
You
fun
were
around
probably in
here.
this room. There was no air conditioning. There's no fan.
Well,
But anyway, I kind of talk about that. But like I said, there's other things though. I mean, there's the pale male nature of German radio where you might get back to back songs from ABBA and AC/DC. There is
wrong with
a
ABBA.
there's nothing wrong with ABBA. It's just that if you wanted to listen to, if you're sitting there looking, searching the dial, looking for a particular genre of music, as they say in Texas, that dog don't hunt. That does not exist here in Germany. They just have these various radio stations
Yeah.
that it's like someone who was high on crack who put together the list, and it's the most disjointed, series of songs mushed together as you could possibly imagine.
They do jump
I
into
think,
the 80s. They jump into the
right,
80s randomly. They'll be playing techno or playing something, and then I don't know, I just
yeah,
died
there's
in
a
your
lot going
arms.
on.
Yeah, I just
Yes,
died
so
in
you
your
got
arms tonight, whatever that I can picture that song coming up, you know.
But there's that. There's this obsession with mineral gassy water that I will never understand. You cannot convince me that it hydrates you. It's like if you're like sweating, you had just worked out and then you turned around and picked up a soda. That's basically what you're doing when you grab water around here. So there's this affinity for that kind of water. I don't understand.
Oh,
Toilet paper is like sandpaper here. I don't get that. I mean, this is a modern country. We can't invest in some Charmin. There's a lot of things here that can be fixed,
well,
just like anywhere.
a lot of them have just going to the bathroom, honestly. Um, but the dehydration, helps because it's really hard to have a public restroom out there. I don't know how people do it. You have to slip into a little cafe, get a cup of coffee, ostensibly to drink the coffee, but you really just want to use the bathroom.
Right.
Um, but yeah, some things are difficult about it. That is one. But it's a short list. I mean, you would have to, think pretty hard to come up with too many more things
Yeah.
annoying. Yeah, but I'm with you. I prefer the water without the bubbles, stilles Wasser. That's my preference. And it doesn't go well with other things. I don't know, sparkling water. It's weird when there's no flavor to it. I don't
Well,
get
yeah. That's what's become the thing in the U.S. I mean, although it seems like it's gotten more popular in the U.S. and maybe it's because of all the flavors stuff, but you can even find Topo Chico or whatever the case may be. I mean, it seems to be more and more popular. I don't get it, but who knows? What do I know? But
well,
here I am last week in Germany,
last week.
and do you miss it here?
Yeah, I miss a lot about it. Sitting, drinking wine is something that I rarely do that at a restaurant or anywhere here, and it's just a reminder that life is really simple, you know,
Yes.
and drinking wine, bread, a little cheese, you can't beat it. But the climate is really nice, but it feels like the heat is hotter there. And it's probably just silly humidity, but it has to do with a lot of things. But being outside, you just get exhausted from the heat there. It's different than here somehow.
Well, I think that might be somewhat colored by the fact that when we're outside here, it's generally we're like schlepping our way to one place or the other or visiting one place or the other with a group of students. And so it's just the entire experience, which makes it more miserable compared to, because it's not like it's that hot, but just like you said, it feels hotter.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some technical term for that, or how far north they are, or
Yeah.
whatever. They're basically in southern Canada, if you
Hmm.
look at where they're located, and their walking is. I mean, they take these long treks that we would never do. We would use Lyft to go down, 2 blocks. Let's get a Lyft, get an Uber.
Well, unfortunately, you've been subjected to a couple of long walks from my host last summer. I think
Oh, that
I
was
was a little
fun.
worried about you. You're struggling. No, you're not fun. You were
You
I
were
didn't
smiling on the
complain
outside, but
I had a good time once I got there, but yeah, I was trying to fake an injury before. Um, seems like I don't know. I think I had just had a surgery or something. I had a note from my doctor saying no hikes with poles going uphill. It was written out, and somehow I lost it before I got there. So,
well, yeah,
but I had a good time,
that's
and
what
it was actually
happens.
wonderful because it started raining right when we finished. So we were standing in the rain, having a drink of something. It was beautiful. One of the more memorable experiences I had there.
That happened to us twice, if you recall. Once here with the Nordic walking crowd,
Right, I love
and
that.
then the second is when we were in Plana. It was that the name of the was that the name of the town, Silva Plana, when we were walking around. We had done the kind of walk where Nietzsche had, we'd seen the places where he kind of sat down and thought about stuff, and we
Yeah,
were making our way back, and it started raining on us.
yeah, that was recorded in our one of our podcasts.
I
Um,
think so. It's part
but it
of
was,
the
but we, but
lot from the field.
that's right. And but you remember experiences when you're slightly uncomfortable being rained on. If it hadn't been raining, we wouldn't probably it would kind of be blocked out. We never would remember the experience. There's something to that. There's a philosophy behind this in the old school, you know. Every once in a while we get into philosophy of living and you need a little rain now and again here, Miller.
Yeah, little obstacles, little suffering can do the soul good.
Wow. So you've learned that. You've been enlightened and you seem happy. You seem awake. You don't seem jet lagged at all. I mean, last time you were kind of coming out of it, but yeah, you're going to be really groggy when you get back here. But right now, you seem to be catching your stride.
Well, I've been here 3 weeks, so it's not like I'm sitting there struggling. And even the last time we talked, I'd been here a week. I don't think I was struggling. I'm fit.
You're
I'm
more
like a bull.
you're more perky. You're kind of perky now. What do you do? I mean, you're part of the you're sort of the pro from Dover at the exchange program, but you're not running anything. You're not in charge anymore. So do you actually go to school?
No, I still go to school. I still do all this stuff. I'm basically just doing the exchange version of tipping my hat and waving my hands at every place that we go, and then I'll sit down and just let everyone else run around like crazy.
Okay, well, that's the way to do it, and it's not like it's a huge commitment, but you do have to
No.
walk around on the tours, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like I'm just loafing. I am putting forth some effort to ensure that this exchange goes well. I'm just not saddled with the burden of responsibility that once fell upon you and then me earlier on.
Yeah, those are tough times. So you're only bringing back half of your group.
Yeah,
Do the school officials like the idea of your kids traveling by themselves unaccompanied on the way home?
I don't care. I mean, it's what first of all, it's not my school anymore. Second of all, it's a private exchange. Third of all, it's with the parents' approval. I
Okay,
don't care. Good
okay,
luck to them. That's what I say.
okay. So, but you're going to be coming back with students, and when is this? What day of the week?
Saturday.
This a week from Saturday or when? This
This
coming
week, this
Saturday.
week, this
Oh,
coming Saturday. So
okay. I was going to come and see you, but I'll be in Mexico.
Cancun,
I don't like to tell people where I'm going here, Miller. It could be Cancun or it could be someplace else.
Puerto Vallarta.
There you go. Um,
Personally, I don't think that neither one of us are so important that someone would go out of their way to find out find out where we are.
well, the problem is I really don't know her, which it's a resort someplace in Mexico. Um, so I don't
You
want to.
could end up down Zihuatanejo way as the
You're just showing off now, here, Miller.
all
Zihuatanejo.
right.
It's not even a place. Well, so we're going to tack on a couple of your observations on Germany. I hope that they're not all insults about the Germans because we have a lot of friends there.
Well,
Talking.
they're not insults. I mean, but they are observations, and
Oh,
observations by their nature might show a bit of contrast to what the general audience of our podcast might be used to. So there will be some compare and contrast. Certainly not meant to be disparaging, but
okay.
you know,
Okay. Well, I'll remember that when I introduce it. I'm not going to say
okay.
Mr. Miller is taking pot shots at his hosts or something. Because they're lovely people.
He hasn't gotten over 1945.
Oh, come on now. You have to bring that.
All right, then. Well, with that, we shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.